Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Davin Cole. Davin, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great this morning. How about yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you
Good.
very much for being with me at this time. I know it's very early for yourself in America, but I appreciate you being with me. Davin, in your own words, what makes you a man?
For me, it's been this ability to rise above adversity, to really have the resilience that I've had over the last couple of years, and just this sense of service I've always had to others. I've always felt that I'm here to give back in one way or the other, and regardless of who I'm giving back to, regardless of our differences or anything like that, for me, that's what, as a man, that's what I do, is try to give back to society.
Awesome. You mentioned giving back to society. Why don't you just give us a brief rundown of what it is that you've done and what it is that you're doing now?
Sure. So I was a police officer in San Francisco for 31 years. I know things are a little bit different in the UK, but we have sheriff's departments here that patrol the county. So I worked for 4 years in our sheriff's department, and then I did 27 years in the police department. Retired 31 years ago. Not your traditional retirement from law enforcement. I'm sure we'll get into that. And right now, because of everything that I've been through, I dedicate a lot of my time on public speaking on PTSD and substance use disorder in law enforcement and first responders.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it because it's not an easy job. I think both sides of the pond can agree with that. Some may say that there's more red tape these days than there may have been. But why don't you just sort of talk us through your career and any sort of stresses or anything that sort of have come up during your time in policing?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, in San Francisco, again, San Francisco is even more unique. The way things here in the United States, I don't really know how to compare it to the UK, but we have cities, and then cities are within a county, and counties are within a state, and then the states within the United States in America. But San Francisco is just one city, one county. So our sheriff's department really doesn't patrol. It's primarily corrections. So we run the county jail, and then we provide security at the court and any of the county buildings. So that's what I did for my first 4 years. The first 2 years I worked in the county jail. So, we kind of jokingly say, if you're going to be a deputy your whole career, a corrections officer, you're doing life on the 8-hour-a-day plan. And that was a unique experience. The jail that I was assigned to originally was built in the late 1930s. It was an old traditional linear style jail with bars and cells. And, my first day in, you go in there and you're locked onto a tier with 75 men by yourself. And you had two tiers. You had north and south tier. It's a little stressful. You're not, it's a bit intimidating to have 75 men who are in jail for a variety of reasons, and you're there by yourself, and you're expected to keep peace and order and love and harmony amongst these men. So I did that for 2 years there, and transferred to our our hospital transportation unit. So I worked at our local general hospital for 2 years. We had a jail ward on the top floor, and there were inmates there who were too injured to be in jail or had mental health conditions that they needed medication and more supervision. After 4 years, I grew up in San Francisco. So for me, working in San Francisco was really the only place I ever wanted to be. So I ended up getting in the San Francisco Police Department. Had a great career. Like I said, I did 27 years there. I worked a variety of assignments. I did patrol. I did what we call plain clothes. It's not really undercover. You just not in a uniform, and we were doing gang enforcement, some robbery abatement, a little bit of undercover work with robbery abatement. I was a field training officer. That's what we call the officers who train new recruits coming out of the police academy. But my real dream assignment was getting into our K-9 unit. And I was fortunate. I was able to get down there after 5 years on the job. I did that for 15 years. Unfortunately, we lost our sergeant, who was also our trainer. When I was down there after about 5 years, we lost him to a heart attack at age of 42. Which kind of talks to the stresses this job can do. You shouldn't be dying at 42 years of age of a heart attack. At that time, me and another officer, we took over the training. I was primarily responsible for the selection and purchase and training of all the dogs. From there, stayed there for 15 years. Finally took a promotional exam to become a sergeant. Did 1 year of investigations as a sergeant, covered everything from petty theft up to attempted homicide. Went back to patrol as a sergeant. Was tapped to start up a new homeless outreach unit in San Francisco. And for the last 5 years, I did that. And for the last 3 years, I was the acting lieutenant in charge of that unit. And then as I said, I kind of unceremoniously retired.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about the rates of incarceration for men. Is there anything that you can sort of touch on that you might see as that being a reason? Is it upbringing? Is it circumstance? What is the reason that there's so many men in jail?
Wow. I think there are so many different reasons. There's so many different aspects of what's going on in our society that lead to a higher incarceration rate. I mean, I think the truth of the matter is, and I'm not getting political or in some of the crazy stuff people want to talk about, but I do think in general, men tend to be more aggressive. Men tend to act out more on impulse and on a need to whatever, need to survive and need to do something. And there is a lot of expectations put on men. There's a lot of expectations that, we're the breadwinner and that we need to perform and that we need to have money. And it's cultural. A lot of it is cultural. I think a lot of it is built into our DNA of who we are as men. And I just think in general, we commit more crime. You're seeing some changes now. You're seeing in society, you're definitely seeing, unfortunately, a rise in women ending up in prison. But I think it's just kind of the overall nature of men and who we are, that we behave in a way, and even to the point of like we're rule breakers. You look at any video and you see the boys on their bicycles making crazy jumps for their bikes, and that's just what we do.
Just some pushing the limits a bit too far, maybe. That's
yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So you touched on, I guess, the stresses and the pressures of the role, but there's something that you sort of touched on within that side of men and wanting to be the provider and wanting to be sort of in control, I guess. Is there an element of that within law enforcement as well, in a case of, I can't have a bad day?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pressure in any first responder. My experience, of course, is in law enforcement, but I also think we see more of it in law enforcement that, we've taken on this protector role. And there is this pressure to be strong, to be tough, not to fail, not to be the best you can be at that job, not to not be there for others. And you absorb that pressure. Something that I found, like we talk about, like I said, wanting to be a protector, wanting to help others, wanting to be there for others. Something I've found, and I haven't really dug deep, but I imagine it's probably exactly the same in the UK is, both from my personal experience and from research that I've looked at, a lot of police officers come from childhood trauma, including myself. And I feel that drives us, as the therapist pointed out, is that we didn't feel safe for whatever reason, whatever trauma we went through as a child. And so now we've taken it upon ourselves to try to make others feel safe in an environment where we didn't feel like we had that option.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if that's true for sort of all men. I mean, probably within law enforcement, it's larger. But I remember reading a quote, which was, "You become the man you wanted to have." So the man that you wanted to have in your life, essentially. So that would make sense for first responders and that side of things to want to be a protector in that sense, which they may be missing, which is obviously trauma. Some other men may have simpler things that they were missing and have instilled that into their life.
No, absolutely. And there's pressure on you, right? There's pressure on you to always be a better man. So that does make sense that you're trying to be the man that you didn't have. And usually that's a better man. I don't think most people are trying to be a worse man. They're trying to be the better man that they didn't have.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I imagine it is mirrored in the UK for sure. With that being said, why don't you touch a little bit on what happened to you? Because when you have that trauma that's sort of built there, embedded, it's naturally going to come out at some point. So why don't you talk about that time when it did come out?
Yeah. So, as I said, I worked in the K9 unit. I was the trainer. And, there is a half tongue in cheek saying that it's not if, it's when you're going to get bit by one of the dogs by accident. It just happens. It's pardon the pun, but it is the nature of the beast,
Yeah.
working with animals. And so just one day during a training exercise, I actually received a very severe bite to my leg, which left about a golf ball size hole. You could actually see my calf muscle. Once I got to the hospital, you could actually see the calf muscles through the hole. So it was pretty gruesome. I was placed on really high doses of prescription opioid pain medicine. And I was on that. I mean, I was in chronic pain. The first 3 years, I was in chronic pain, which is a trauma in and of itself. Anyone who's ever been through chronic pain, they will tell you that creates a new layer of that onion of trauma that you have. I was fortunate. It was an impinged nerve, so the scar tissue was pressing up against the nerves in my leg, which was causing, like I said, chronic pain. But they were able to finally go in and repair the damage. But when they went to go wean me off of the pain meds, and I already suspected probably a good year and a half leading up to that I had developed an addiction to the opioids. And for me, looking back and digesting this with through therapy and whatnot, I was self-medicating, as most of us do who have an addiction issue, is I was self-medicating through the undiagnosed PTSD. I was self-medicating through this trauma because for me and a lot of men and women I've spoke to who had, especially particularly with the opioids, it was a happy pill. It made me feel good again. It put me back in the mood that I used to be when I was younger. That addiction continued, even after that surgery. So overall, it was 10 years on the prescription pain meds. But that extended out for 10 years. I added alcohol to it when the opioids weren't enough anymore. I started drinking large amounts of vodka. Originally, it was just whatever alcohol, but eventually I settled on vodka, which does seem to be the over here, at least, the drink of choice for alcoholics. A lot of it has to do, for me, I know it sounds weird, but less calories than other alcohols, but also less of a odor when you drink it a lot. You don't sweat it out as much, so they say. But it really wasn't medicating anymore. I was having depressive episodes. I was having suicidal ideations all the time. And really, it was making it worse. In my head, of course, I thought, it was making it better, but it really wasn't. And I was verbalizing the suicidal ideations. I was telling my wife that I wanted to die. I was starting to plan out my suicide. I didn't want it to look like a suicide. So I was planning on driving off of a cliff here by where I live, where, it's a notorious area where people drive off the cliff and die because of the road conditions. And that continued for that full 10 years until my arrest.
10 years is a long time to be on medication. When do you think it switched from pain to dependent? When do you think that you probably should have been weaned off them?
Well, definitely after the surgery. Before the surgery, it's a tough call. It's, I was in a lot of pain and I needed the medication without a doubt. And the medication helped. They did try alternative non-narcotic pain meds. Probably would have worked, but I didn't want it to. So, looking back, I probably didn't even give any of the other medications a real try.
Yeah.
But definitely after the surgery, they did try to wean me off. I had a pain manager and she weaned me off. But because mine was a work-related injury, over here you're covered by workman's comp. To take care of you. And then once your case is done, they close out your case. So I went back to my family doctor. And I just told my family doctor, oh, yeah, the pain's still there. I still need the medication. And this was before really the opioid crisis took off here in the United States. So they really weren't scrutinizing it as much. So, pardon me, he had no problem putting me back on the pain meds. And that's where I stayed. Should a doctor have intervened somewhere in between that last 7-year gap? I mean, I would say maybe. it's easy to gaslight doctors. You know, you just, hey, I'm in pain. I hurt.
Yeah.
I had a bona fide injury. There's pictures of a hole in my leg that you put your thumb in. So they're not, you know, I think now would be a lot more difficult. I think definitely now somebody would have intervened and said, hey, why are you taking these pain meds still after all this time?
There's a weird balance, isn't there, in the States where medicine is a business. It's a big thing, right? And if you're still buying pills, then they're making money, which is counterintuitive when it comes to healing people. And that's a whole other debate for sure. And as you said, that's potentially what has led to the opioid crisis that's currently there in the States.
For sure it did. You know, and there is an incentive to doctors to prescribe not just pain meds, but just pharmaceuticals across the board. We know that. It's no secret. It's been well documented. And, you know, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on how the business of pharmaceuticals is done here in the United States. But, you know, yeah, I could easily look back and say, sure, someone should have intervened. But, you know, I have to bear some of that responsibility too of you know, gaslighting the doctors and not seeking that help that I knew I needed it. I knew I had an addiction. I knew I needed the help. I just couldn't find the strength to do it.
So did the alcohol start when they suggested switching and they started to try you on different things? When did that occur?
It actually started kind of related to that. So as the laws here in the United States changed, initially you could refill that prescription every 20 days. You get a 30-day prescription, but by the 20th day, you'd have another refill at the pharmacy and you could go refill it. But as they started to crack down, as the opioid crisis became more prevalent in the media, they started changing the rules. And it went to 7 days, and then it went to 3 days before the end of your prescription. Then it became the 29th day. So you could not refill your opioids until the 29th day. So that's really when I started laying on the alcohol, because before, if I ran out early, it was no problem because I knew I could go get a refill. So as long as I could make a 30-day prescription last 20 days, I was good. But then it was 23 days, 27 days, and then 29 was starting to become impossible. So there was kind of a sliding scale where the more pain meds I had, the less alcohol I drink. And the less pain meds I had, as I started to have to, you know, parse them out until my next prescription, I would drink more alcohol to kind of compensate for the pain meds that I wasn't taking. But it just got to the point where I was just drinking. I was drinking the same no matter what time of the month it was. It was 30 days a week. And then you just start being creative. You know, you have family members who don't use theirs. You know, you have other people, you know, who got prescribed it and they don't like it because it makes them nauseous or they don't like the feeling, but they're more than happy to give you theirs because they're not going to use it. And you just keep going along. You know, as I don't like the misnomer, but it's what we say. You know, you're a functioning addict. You're going to work. You're going to your kids' games, the sports games. You're going on vacation. Life is going along, and inside, especially with men, you're hiding this deep, dark secret and self-medicating alone at night in your bedroom.
That was going to be my next question around functioning. Like, how? It sounds like you had enough to have a party.
Yeah, it's funny. I get that question a lot. I don't know. My therapist had told me, you know, before, one of the first therapists I saw was like, I don't even know how you hadn't, honestly, she goes, I don't know how you haven't killed yourself before. She goes, I don't know how you made it. And I was doing well at work. Like I said, I promoted to sergeant. Ironically, they put me in charge of the homeless outreach unit, which a lot of that revolves around people with substance use disorders and mental health issues. I actually ran a program. We had a program here in the States, and a lot of agencies where we take people committing low-level crimes to support their drug habit, and we deflect them out of the judicial system, and we try to deflect them into help, into a program. And so I was in charge of that. I was the coordinator for our department's deflection program. You know, so before I moved up to the lieutenant's position, I was more out on the streets. You know, I could spend 2, 3, 4 days trying to talk somebody into this program, telling them, hey, you know, you got this addiction and there's help here and there's people willing to come, and I could have a case manager here in 20 minutes. And I would go home at night with this incredible guilt of, wow, you can spend all this time to help someone else get off of their drugs, and I can't do it for my own self. You know, and it built on that guilt and more trauma. Like, why can't I do this for myself?
It's interesting that you were talking, probably, I imagine, mainly to men in those situations that were potentially at rock bottom with their addiction, and they're still fighting against it being an addiction. So if you then look at the other side of the scale of that for men, which is functioning addicts, as it's sort of referred to these days, it must be so hard for those people to admit that they have a problem.
It is, because when, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but when you're on the street and you're down and out and you're addicted to drugs, you've kind of resolved yourself to that's where you are. And it's an unfortunate way that people get. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. It's unfortunate. But when you're working, when you're trying to present this image that you're okay, that everything's okay, that when you want your kids to feel like everything's okay, and you want your wife or your family, and when you have a job and you're going to work every day and you're putting your best in and you're doing your best at work, and inside you have both this struggle and the secret, and it tears at you and you don't realize it at the time how much it's eating you inside and how much it's really causing a deterioration in your mental health and your physical health, both. And yeah, the struggle's hard. And, I had a resilience that I never knew I had. I think that's why I made it that long with it. I've always had a lot of self-doubt about myself and about, my abilities and my strength. That is something I've walked away with. It was like, wow, okay, I have not given myself the due credit as far as inner strength and resilience. But it is tough, and it will chip. It will break. It chips away. But there is a breaking point. Everybody has a breaking point. It's coming. And anybody out there who's struggling, I will tell you, it will break. That dam will burst. And if you don't start plugging up those holes now, you're not going to be able to control it when it goes through like I did.
Yeah, so there's obviously the break, but you talked about verbalizing your suicidal ideations to your wife. Was there any conversations between her and yourself in regards to you need to go and see somebody, you need to do something about this? What were those conversations like?
Yeah, she knew about the alcohol, and that's kind of hard to hide. She really didn't know about the pills. She would find a pill bottle every once in a while, and I would, lie to her and tell her, oh, the pain came back, and so I just got a prescription for the month, and it's okay. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to go. She knew I needed help, and she would tell me. And my police department had a really good employee assistance program. We call it our behavioral science unit. And she knew about it, and she would encourage me to call. I was waiting on like I said, I was an acting lieutenant, but I was next up to get a permanent position to lieutenant. And so that was an internal lie that I told myself, and externally I told her was that, once this promotion comes through, I'm going to ask for help. I don't want to do it now because I don't want it to affect my promotion or where I'm assigned. But once this happens, then yeah, I'm going to ask for help. It's like I said, it's an internal lie you tell yourself to, I guess, an excuse deep down to just let yourself continue what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies on the brain, which is like it tries to keep you in safety mode, right? And at that current time, taking pills and doing alcohol was safety mode for you, for sure.
Yeah.
So you talk about breaking point. You say it's going to come. It comes in different waves to different men, but let's talk about your experience.
Yeah, so I struggled. It was pretty much so I didn't, and this is, again, a functioning addict internal lie. I didn't use at work. I didn't drink at work. I didn't take pills at work. So therefore, I'm not that bad.
Yeah.
I'm doing okay. But it was like a set clock. Come 6:30, 7 p.m. at night, down came the alcohol. I mean, as soon as I left work, I was popping a pill. I mean, as soon as I got in my car to start the engine to go home, there was a pill in my mouth, right? So I created these false moral white lines in the sand that I don't use at work, but it's okay for me to get in the car and take a pill and drive home. So right by the time I got home, the feeling of euphoria that I would get from the pills would be kicking in. So that was going on. The depression was getting worse. The suicidal ideations were getting worse. As I said, I was starting to plan it out. This is what I'm going to do, because I realized I had tried to stop drinking. I told myself, if I can stop drinking alcohol, good, I'll stop, and then I'll stop the pills. No problem. But let me do one at a time. If I try to do both, It won't work. So let me do one. I never made it really more than a week. I made it 30 days once and then just went right back to it. So I'd resolved myself to the fact that this was never going to end. And as I said, I didn't know I had PTSD. So I didn't know what was going on with me. By, even my own self-evaluation, things were going great. My career was going great. My marriage was great. My daughters were doing well. There was nothing I could point at and go, that's why I'm doing this. This bad thing happened to me. And so that fed into my depression. I'm like, why are you doing this Why are you doing this to yourself? It doesn't make sense. And since I don't know why it's happening, I'm never going to make it in. I'm just stuck, and I don't want to live like this anymore. So the last 2 weeks before my arrest, it was bad. It was a nightly thought of, just go get in your car, go drive over to Devil's Slide, which is what it's called, and just drive off the cliff. And then I'd wake up in the morning sober and be like, oh my God, no, I would never do that to my wife and my kids. But it was just getting harder. And we had a destiny wedding. So we were supposed to fly down to Mexico for a family member's wedding. I was down to one pill, and I had 10 days before my refill. And a family member that I could normally reach out to who also has their own prescription would be able to give me a handful, and that would always tide me over until my refill. Didn't have any. And I was like, shoot, what am I going to do now? Because I had run out, and I'd been through withdrawals. And if you talk to most opioid addicts, especially with the fentanyl, but just in general, a lot of them medicate to avoid the withdrawals. It's not even so much that they're getting this big high. Is to avoid the withdrawals that come, because the withdrawals are horrible. And the third or fourth day is really when it starts to kick in. The first 2 days, you just feel a little but by the third and fourth day is when, it's like the worst flu. You're not able to hold anything down. I won't get graphic, but it's really bad. You barely get out of bed. Well, three to 4 days out was when I was going to be on a plane to Mexico. And I'm just thinking in my head, I cannot wait. I'm dad. Like, I take care of the passports. I take care of the boarding passes. I make sure we're set to go. That's kind of my role here in my house. And then I'm going to be down here in Mexico. What am I going to do? Lay in my room sick? And, people ask me, why this, why that? It was the only thing that came into my head, and that was to just go rob a pharmacy. Go into a pharmacy, give them a note, get the pills, and leave. And nobody will get hurt. You're not robbing someone on the street for money. You're just trying to get pills. And now's the justification in my head. And so that's what I did. I walked into a pharmacy, handed them a note. They gave me 9 bottles of pain medication. And I walked out, and the police department was already there. And next thing you know, I'm being handcuffed. And that was it. I bawled like a baby. I told the officers my life was screwed and it was over. That was it. Everything ended for me in that day. My career ended. My freedom for a while ended. And, I had gone to that pharmacy carrying my gun. It's a little bit different here. American police officers, once you're sworn in, you're allowed to carry a gun 24/7. So I had brought my gun with me to kill myself, because I had said, if the police show up, I'm not going to jail. That's never going to happen. So I'm just going to kill myself and end it. I did it. Thank God. Apparently, looking at the body worn camera, one of the officers, I've since gone back to that police department. It's actually the city I live in, and talked to them. And they've told me that, I had reached, they didn't know I had a gun, but reviewing their body worn cameras, that I'd reached for it twice before I went down to the ground. So it was there. I mean, it was a thought. I don't remember thinking about it at all. But yeah, so that was my hard crash. That was my dam bursting.
Can you recall the feeling at that point? Was it relief? Was it panic? Like, you've mentioned all those things, like career's over, life's over, but also the flip side of that, you can't take pain meds anymore. You can't drink any. Like, can you recall that at all?
Yeah, obviously it was a flood of emotions. I didn't think too much about. I think the relief was just that it's over. One way or the other, it was over. I think there was. I probably didn't realize at the time. I think there was a sense of kind of a relief. Now, I watched the pharmacist call 911. I watched her call the police, and I didn't leave. I stayed there. Like any police officer would recognize,
Yeah.
she's given my description on the phone. I should probably leave because the police are going to be here any second if she's calling. And I didn't. And so I know now, and again, this was told to me by therapists and psychiatrists and drug rehab people, is that was your cry for help. You knew you were going to get caught. You went there with the intention. You didn't go there with the intention to getting away. You went there with the intention of getting caught. That was your subconscious mind saying it's either death or jail, and you better take jail. And so it took me there. I committed that crime. I got caught. But as you said, it was the end. It was the end of my addiction. It was the end. It was a final diagnosis to what was going on. That's what gave me my diagnosis of the PTSD. That's what gave me an answer to a lot of these questions that I had been struggling with. So yeah, it was. I don't think in that moment I recognized it, but looking back, I could definitely sense that it was, in a weird way, a release of stress and pressure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it might not have been exactly in that moment. Hindsight's a wonderful thing and all that, for sure.
Always.
What was next then? So you're arrested. You obviously going through all that malarkey and obviously the differing sides of the fact that you're in law enforcement. There must have been some stuff running through your head. But what was the outcome of all that? What was next? Things were diagnosed. What happened next?
Yeah, so credit to my police department. They were at my house. Our behavioral science unit, our employee assistance program, was at my house the next morning. No judgment, no nothing. We're here for you, and we have a bed for you in a 30-day treatment. So we do have a Bay Area, here in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's a 30-day inpatient treatment that's open. It's for everybody, but they have what we call here culturally competent therapists. So there's staff, pretty much any first responder in the San Francisco Bay Area that has a substance use disorder will go here to this one facility. Mountain Vista Farms is a beautiful place up in Napa Valley. Everyone goes there. So they're like, we've secured you a bed. We're taking you up there. This was on Thursday morning. Like, we're taking you there Friday. Excuse me. They took me there, and I spent 30 days there detoxing and going through my initial 30-day treatment program. From there, I came out. I was still a mess. I was still dealing with just the fallout of everything that was going on. But again, back to your point, there was like this inner subconscious sense of relief that, I'm getting help. Went into a 90-day outpatient program, but did relapse on the alcohol several times. It was a year before I found out what my legal consequences were. And in that year leading up to it, there were several relapses on the alcohol. No excuses, but, it was just the unknown. Okay, I've got this behind me. I was allowed to retire. I was allowed to keep my pension. I don't know what my life is going to look like going forward, and I don't know where I'm ending up. Will I end up in a state prison for a couple of years, or will I get probation and not go to jail, or will there be something kind of in between? And my attorney really didn't know. He was working on, obviously, the better end of just probation, but, he didn't have a lot of control over that. And so the fear of ending up in prison and leaving my family for an extended period of time was causing those relapses. I did go back into another 30-day treatment, came out, took almost a year. I was arrested in November of 2021. And in December of 2022 was when I was sentenced. It was December 23rd, so 2 days before Christmas. My attorney had come to me and said, well, it looks like here's what's going to happen. You're going to get probation, but you're going to have to go to jail for a year in the county jail. So you stay local. You don't go off to a state prison. I was hoping it being 2 days before Christmas, maybe the judge would have some Christmas spirit and suspend that and it just give me probation. It didn't happen. It was a rough week, because we did fully expect that I was going to be taken into custody on the 23rd. We had to celebrate Christmas a week early. That was rough for me and, for my daughters and my wife. But, I did that on the 23rd. They did sentence me to 3 years of probation and a year in our county jail. Because of overcrowding, you only do 50% of your sentence. So I did go to jail for 6 months because of my status as a former police officer. I was on confinement, so I stayed in my cell all day. I got out for 30 minutes, and that was my opportunity to shower and call my family in those 30 minutes. And the showering was every other day, because one day you're inside, one day they call it an outdoor rec, but you're on the 6th floor of a building, so you're really not outdoor. You're just in a fenced-in, I guess, patio area is the best way to describe it. I did 6 months. I got out on Father's Day. I look at that as a blessing to come out on Father's Day. Spent the next 6 months really just working on myself. That did set me back again because of my status. I didn't have any access to resources in the jail. I had no access to AA, NA, or any mental health programs because everything was in group and I couldn't attend any groups. So a little, it wasn't a major slide. It was mainly, I came out strong, I think, mentally and the resilience wise, but the PTSD was left untreated. And so that kind of mental health struggle was still there as far as the PTSD. Coming out, we really started to, dive deep into that and looking at just the traumas of the stuff that I experienced at work and then some of my childhood. And then, for the last year, good year, so it's been a good solid year now. I just try to get out there and share my experience and on great podcasts like this and some public speaking and some peer support classes, just telling my story and trying to break this stigma of, law enforcement and men in general that, we struggle and societal wise, we're not really always allowed to express those struggles and to verbalize it and ask for help. It's that stigma is still there, unfortunately.
As a man who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, so to speak, would you say that the position you found yourself in after was worse than if you'd have asked for help? Because I feel that's where a lot of stigma is, right? Is that if I ask for help, that looks weak. I'm no longer a provider. I'm no longer a protector, etc., etc. In hindsight, night and day?
Night and day. Night and day. I am in a better place than I am now than I have been in years, in decades. One of the things I get asked a lot is, in particular to peer support and mental health programs is, what, like I said, we have a very robust one in my old agency. What could be done better to get people to ask for help to break that stigma? And to me, I think what it is basically what you just said, what it looks like at the end of that tunnel. Like, we could tell you, hey, you could go to a program and you could go to AA and AA is great or NA is great or there's these other non-AA But really, when you get to that end, when you finally get to a point where you could turn around and look back at that path you've been down and go, holy cow, I feel so much better. I felt like I've never felt. And I'd actually heard this was another, he's actually a friend of mine. And I was listening he was a police officer, and similar thing with opioids. And he'd said this is that, people always say, I want to be the man that I used to be. And he goes, no, because the man you used to be got you to where you were. You want to be a new man coming out of this. And so that's what I tell people. You come out a new person. You really do. And you come out with this sense of excitement, a sense of accomplishment. And the struggle's real. It's not easy. Like I said, I relapsed. And even the day I got out of jail, what did I want? A freaking drink. And that's what I did. Right. And then I just like, okay, what are you doing to yourself? Stop this. This repetitive behavior is dumb. But that was the only tool I knew. Like, what's the only tool I had in my box was to drink or was to take pills. Once I built and got a bigger toolbox, that I knew better how to handle that. So that's what I tell people is, you may feel weak when you try to ask for help, but when you come out the other side, like I said, I did not know I had this inner strength. And now I feel stronger mentally than I have in my whole life, quite honestly, because it allowed me to learn that about myself and to develop that strength and push that forward and like, damn, all right, I'm good. I'm okay.
Amazing.
Got through this.
Yeah, it's look, this is why I do this podcast. I love to hear stories of real men, right? We see a lot of podcasts that might have a a Goggins in there or someone that's done something extremely crazy and this feat of physical endurance. This was UVU, right? And you came out the other side, which for me is more powerful. The more stories that we can share like this, the better for sure. So I'm really appreciative of you sharing your story. There's obviously some bits in there that some people might be like, "Whoa, I'm surprised you even shared that part of it." So it was very open, and I'm extremely grateful for that. What's next for you?
It's funny. I spent 3 years not working. I recently was asked to join a company as a director of operations for a security company. So I have that. I'll do that for a little bit. For me, is just getting out and telling my story. I really want to just get out as many places as possible. I'm willing to travel wherever. If somebody wants me to come speak to their organization or to their company, because it isn't just my industry. It isn't just, like you mentioned earlier, it isn't just first responders. This is a struggle, men and women too, right? These are real struggles, and there is a stigma across many industries where just asking for help seems like a weakness. And the people that I found in my personal experience, the people that are the most vocal who are like, "Oh, if you need help, you're weak, or you're not a real man," or this, to me, and what I found is they're struggling inside.
Yeah.
And they just don't know how to ask for help. So they put up this facade that they're okay, and anyone else who asks for help is the weak one and not them. And it really just isn't true. They're struggling too, and they're having issues too. So yeah, just going forward for me is just telling this. I may start my own podcast down the road. I will be working on a book this year, talking about my story, talking about my childhood, and kind of how that contributed to everything. But a big part of where I'm at now in my life is my wife has said this a lot to me. She said this in the beginning, and it really helped me through. And she goes, "Things happen for you, not to you." So she goes, "This happened for you. It didn't happen to you. This addiction, this mental health struggle, your arrest, all of this happened for you." And I really believe I'm here right now. I'm right here on this podcast right now because I'm meant to be. Because somebody's going to hear it. Someone's going to go, "Holy crap, that could have been me. And what can I do?" And I've gotten that feedback, and that makes me happy that, hey, I listened to this podcast, or Davin came to speak at our event, and I went and asked for help because I didn't want to end up there. And I needed someone to remind me why asking for help is okay.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first reasons that I started this podcast was I have my story and other people have their story. I don't resonate with everyone, and more people need to talk, because then we can hear more stories and it hopefully resonates with someone. So that's the reason that I invite people on like yourself, is to just share your story, so that if there's just a little bit of something that's similar, you can just go, "Oh, okay, good. There's hope, there's light, there's a path, there's something I can try," which is the whole reason for this. Now, you spoke briefly about first responders, and I always end with this question, but I'll sort of let you tie it into first responders as well. What in the space are you seeing that is really good, and what do you want to see more of in regards to mental health and sort of helping relieve stress?
Yeah, I think in the broad sense with men, I think it has become easier than, say, 20 years ago for men to seek help and to say, "Hey, I am struggling. This is a real struggle." Within the first responder, specifically within the law enforcement community, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, there has been a lot more attention brought to the mental health struggles of law enforcement, both here in the United States. I'm a bit of a police Anglophile. I love everything about the British police. I read stories, and I have a lot of people on LinkedIn that I connected with. It has gotten better. The stigma's slowly being chipped away for people to ask help, but we're not there yet. We are definitely not there yet. I just this week, a friend of mine posted on his LinkedIn account about an officer he spoke to who went to his supervisor and said, "Hey, I'm kind of struggling." And the response was, "Well, we don't have the staffing today for that." And so that's still a real thing. And again, a couple months ago, someone else told me they went to their peer support, and then his chief demanded that person he spoke to tell him what was discussed during that peer support meeting. So these are horrible things that shouldn't be happening. I've read articles in the UK. Apparently, it's not that dissimilar over there where, hey, we have a peer support mental health program, but it's in name only. And so I think that's where we really need to work on it. Like, if you're going to say you're going to have a program, make it a real program. This is not a political tool to say, hey, I'm the boss and look what I've created, and it's not a real program.
Yeah.
You got to put something in place that's real. And that's something else I try to consult on is what should that look like and what it definitely should not look like. And telling someone that you don't have the staffing is just pure crap. Pardon my language, but it is pure crap.
Davin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to hear more and they want to find you, let them know where they can find you. And I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
Yeah, probably right now the best place is on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. If you need to reach out to me, it's just my name, contact Davin Cole at Gmail. And I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to come out and talk. And if you have an organization, and especially in the UK, if anybody wants to fly me to the UK, I would love to come out there and talk out there. And my final thought out there is never be afraid to ask for help. It's so funny how there's things we'll ask for help. And again, I'll kind of focus on the law enforcement aspect. You ask any police officer, they will call for backup if they're going to take on a 6'6" MMA fighter. They won't even think twice about it. Well, let's make that the norm for asking for mental health. Don't be afraid to ask for help because you are fighting a 6'6" MMA fighter by yourself if you think you can do it alone.